Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves waking up on the dusty banks of the Nile. Just as the morning sun paints the river in liquid gold, you're lying on a reed mat, your feet halfway buried in warm sand, which is already starting to creep into places you didn't know sand could reach above you. Palm trees sway lazily, and a couple of ibis birds are bickering like they have some kind of personal vendetta. The air smells faintly of mud, riverweed, and a hint of wood smoke from some unseen hearth. You sit up and stretch. The Nile shimmers calm and ancient, but also loud, teeming with splashing fish, creaking boats, and the occasional shout of a boatman cursing his oar. And as you trudge closer to the water to wash your face, you notice something odd. The locals nearby aren't just rinsing their hands and feet. Nope, they're hunched over, scrubbing their teeth with little sticks and pastes, as if their morning simply cannot begin until they've gotten every last bit of last night's lentil stew out from between their molars. It's a little unsettling, honestly. Everyone here seems to have their morning routine down to a fine science, but you're already sweating, and let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes trying to keep up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and the local time, because nothing says bonding like strangers comparing time zones. Note, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch at the water's edge and cup your hands to drink, but the river is silty and warm, with little bits of grit sticking between your teeth. You spit into the reeds, and the nearest fisherman gives you a look that says amateur. A woman nearby giggles softly, and still squatting, starts rubbing her teeth with a twig whose end is frayed like a little brush. She catches your eye, and with the kind of confidence only a 3,000-year-old culture can give you, she proudly shows off her pearly whites. Here the sand isn't just underfoot, it's in the bread in your nostrils, and yes, very much in your teeth. The Nile's annual floods are both blessing and curse. The water brings life to the land, but leaves a layer of fine grit on everything it touches. You realize this is probably why the Egyptians got so creative with dental care. Even modern archaeologists have noticed the amount of wear on their teeth, like chewing on sandpaper every meal. Not the best recipe for longevity, unless you count being mummified as a way to cheat death. You pick up one of the little sticks left behind by a child and notice the end smells faintly of mint, or maybe it's more like myrrh. Either way, it's not bad. You stick it in your mouth and try to copy what everyone else is doing, which only makes the man next to you snort and mutters something under his breath that sounds suspiciously like hopeless foreigner. There's even a dog padding past, tail wagging, who seems to have better oral hygiene than you. His master scoops a handful of some powder from a jar and dabs it onto the dog's teeth. You can't help but chuckle. So yes, Egyptians apparently cared so much about toothpaste that they might even have shared it with their pets. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a case of wishful interpretation of dog remains, but here in the dawn haze, it feels perfectly plausible. And then, because of course your stomach growls loudly, the woman with the frayed twig grins again and offers you a chunk of bread. You bite in and immediately feel like you've just eaten half the dessert floor, gritty, chewy, and strangely addictive. You wonder how on earth these people have any enamel left at all. A fringe theory even suggests some used powdered gemstones, literally grinding their own teeth away in pursuit of freshness. As you glance down the river, you see a boy running with a basket of reeds and something sparkling in the sunlight. You catch a glimpse of another jar being passed from hand to hand, the contents glinting white as flour. It's probably a mixture of crushed rock salt, ashes, and who knows what else. You're starting to realize toothpaste here isn't just a hygiene product. It's an entire social ritual, a statement of dignity. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth seep through your skin and listening to the gentle slosh of oars in the distance. The ibis birds have stopped bickering, and for just a second the world quiets. And you think maybe sand between your teeth isn't the worst thing after all. These people have made peace with it, and even managed to turn it into something worth smiling about. You leave the riverbank behind, still chewing on that sandy bit of bread, and trying not to crunch too loudly, and wander up a narrow path lined with reeds and palm fronds. Ahead a little cluster of reed huts huddles in the morning haze, their roofs sagging slightly under the weight of last night's dew. Smoke curls lazily from a few clay chimneys, and goats meander between doorways as if they too have errands to run. The village is already awake. You can hear the low hum of conversation, the occasional clang of a pot lid, and the rhythmic sound of a woman pounding something in a mortar. You step into the main, laying more of a wide strip of hard-packed sand really, and pause to take in the scene. Children dart between legs giggling while men and women tend to morning chores, but there's something else. Almost everyone seems to have one hand occupied with their teeth. Some chew on sticks, others have little pots of white powder which they dip into, dabbing a fingerful onto their gums. You even catch one man with a very dramatic mustache holding two sticks at once, one in each hand, scrubbing away like a man possessed. The woman from the river is here too, sitting on a low stool grinding what looks like dried herbs with a stone. She glances up at you, smirks, and motions for you to come closer. You oblige, because what else are you going to do? As you approach, the smell of her little workstation hits you, earthy, minty, and sharp like crushed sage mixed with salt. She points at the mortar and says something that sounds like netri, which you figure is the name of the powder. She pinches some between her fingers and holds it under your nose. You sneeze, which makes her laugh out loud and slap her knee. Apparently this netri is one of their standard dental powders made from ground pumice, natron salt, and a handful of dried herbs. According to one fringe theory, they may even have added powdered ox hoofs to strengthen their teeth, though historians still argue whether that was medicine or just a bit of ancient placebo. You watch as she sprinkles some powder on a little reed mat, then picks up a twig and presses its frayed end into the dust before scrubbing her molars with practiced ease. The sound it makes, a faint scratching like sandpaper on parchment, is strangely soothing. She offers you the twig. You hesitate, then take it. It's still warm from her hand, and yes, it does taste kind of salty and a little like ashes, but it's not unpleasant. Certainly better than the sand still stuck between your own teeth over by another hut. A group of children are sitting cross-legged playing a game with bones and shells. Every so often, they pause to rub their gums with sticks or lick their fingers and press them into a communal bowl of powder. You notice one of the little boys has his teeth painted black. You make a face, but an older woman nearby taps your shoulder and points to her own blackened teeth, smiling proudly. Apparently this was sometimes a fashion statement, or maybe even protective, depending on who you ask. Scholars are still debating whether blackened teeth meant you were stylish or just superstitious. Either way, the kids seem to think it's hilarious. Ausner B. A man sharpens a knife on a stone, and between strokes he spits into the sand. You catch a glimpse of his teeth, surprisingly white though chipped and worn flat, like he's been gnawing rocks for breakfast, which, to be fair, he kind of has. What with all that sand in their bread. At the far end of the lane, a goat wanders into a hut and emerges a moment later with a frayed stick dangling from its mouth. Everyone bursts out laughing. You swear the goat seems to be enjoying itself, gnawing away as if it too has a stake in the morning ritual. You sit down on a low bench outside one of the huts, the reed mat beneath you scratching at your calves. A young boy plops down next to you and starts mimicking your every move, right down to the awkward way you hold your borrowed twig. He grins up at you, showing off a mouthful of powdery half-brushed teeth, and you can't help but grin back. A breeze picks up, rustling through the reeds, and for a moment, the whole village seems to quiet down. You close your eyes, feeling the grit of sand on your eyelids and the faint sting of salt on your lips. And as you listen to the faint chorus of scraping, spitting, and giggling, you realize this is not just about keeping teeth clean, it's about being part of something. Even if right now you're just the awkward foreigner, fumbling with a twig. A woman claps her hands twice, and the whole village seems to shift into the next stage of their day. People rise, stretch, and start heading toward the center of the village, where the smell of bread baking grows stronger. You stand brushing the dust from your hands and glance back at the river. The sun is climbing higher, and the ibis birds have resumed their bickering. You catch sight of your own reflection in a puddle lips smeared with ash, eyes still a little sleepy, and think to yourself, well, at least your breath smells better, and who knows, maybe you'll even figure out what the black teeth mean before the day is over, or maybe that mystery, like so many others, here will just have to stay unsolved. You drift deeper into the village, drawn by the steady scratching sound of styluses against papyrus. Round a corner the huts give way to a shaded courtyard where a handful of young men sit cross-legged, each with a low table, scrolls, and a tiny pile of reed brushes. At first glance you think it's just a school, but as you step closer you notice that every single one of them periodically pauses to pick up a twig or dip their fingers into little bowls of powder and scrub at their teeth with obsessive care. The eldest of the group, clearly the master scribe here, barely looks up when you arrive, but the youngest, no more than a boy, flashes you a grin and beckons you over. He gestures to an empty cushion and you sit. The boy hands you a scrap of papyrus with a little tooth drawn on it along with some hieroglyphs. You can't quite decipher. He points to his mouth, then to yours, and gives an exaggerated nod of approval. You grin because what else are you going to do in the low table? Before you are laid out a surprising array of tools aside from the reeds and pots of ink for writing. There are little jars of crushed pumice, salt, and herbs, as well as sticks in various stages of fray. The boy picks up one of the sticks and starts twirling it like a magician before plunging it into a small pot of powder. Then with a flourish, he scrubs his teeth. You take a closer look at the jars and notice that some contain a bright red powder. The boy winks at you, dabs some on his finger, and presses it to his gums. The effect is startling. His teeth seem whiter by contrast. He offers you the jar and you can't help but dab just a little and try it yourself. It tastes faintly of ochre and salt, not unpleasant, and leaves a subtle heat on your tongue. Historians still argue whether the red powder was purely cosmetic or actually helped fight infection, but here in the courtyard, no one seems too concerned with scholarly debates. They just seem delighted by the pop of color across from you. One of the older scribes is working on a long scroll filled with symbols and illustrations of teeth. It looks like some kind of dental manual, though it could just as easily be a prayer for clean breath. Hard to tell when you don't read hieroglyphs. He glances up and gives you a toothy grin, revealing one noticeably gold tooth gleaming in the sun. You arch an eyebrow and he chuckles, tapping it with his reed brush before returning to his work. And of the fringe theories about Egyptian dentistry is that they used thin sheets of gold to cap broken or worn teeth, not unlike the fancy crowns of today. Whether that was a common practice or just a privilege of the elite is, as you might guess, still up for debate. A little cat slinks into the courtyard, winding between cushions and tables, clearly at home among scrolls and scribes. Someone sprinkles a pinch of tooth powder onto the ground for it, and the cat bats at it lazily before curling up in a shaft of sunlight. You can't help but envy its ability to just nap whenever it possesses. You watch the boy sharpen his reed brush and wipe his fingers on his linen robe. You begin to notice how often they all pause to clean their teeth. It seems less like a chore and more like punctuation and natural break between lines of text or deep thoughts. Write a few words, scrub a few seconds, draw a little diagram, spit in the sand. It's almost rhythmic, like breathing. The boy leans over and scribbles something on your papyrus scrap, then pushes it toward you. It's another little drawing, a tooth, a twig, and what looks like a jar. He points to each one in turn, then beams at you like he's just solved the secret of the universe. You smile back and give him a mock bow, which makes him giggle. He picks up a stick and hands it to you like it's a diploma, and the whole courtyard bursts into a soft, approving murmur. You've clearly passed some kind of test, though you're not entirely sure what. The elder finally raises his eyes and gives you the faintest nod before returning to his scroll. You take that as your cue to stand. The boy waves his twig in farewell as you slip out of the courtyard, the sound of scratching, reeds, and faint tooth scrubbing fading behind. Yao back outside. The sun has climbed higher and the air hums with heat. The dust underfoot is warm now, almost hot, and the smell of baking bread and crushed herbs drifts through the village lanes. You glance back toward the courtyard and see the Cats still sprawled, their tail twitching contentedly in the sunlight, and as you trudge onward, you can't help but wonder, did that man really have a gold tooth? Or was that just a trick of the morning light? Then again, in this place anything seems possible. You follow your nose, next drawn by the rich heady aroma wafting through the air. The lane widens into a small square where dozens of market stalls lean against each other. Like tired donkeys, it's a riot of color here, fabrics flapping in the breeze, baskets overflowing with dates, and figs glinting, copper bowls catching the sun. But what really catches your attention are the little stalls selling powders, lots and lots of powders, piled high in earthen jars. They look like soft dunes of white, red, green, and even a surprising bluish tint. Women in linen robes haggle over prices, while merchants scoop tiny handfuls for customers to sniff, taste, and even smear on their gums. You ease your way through the crowd, careful not to bump into anyone's basket of eggs or accidentally purchase a goat. A merchant spots you, flashes a grin, and waves you over. His hands are dusted with what looks like flour, but as you get closer, you see it's much coarser, like ground-up seashells. Thrusts a jar under your nose, you inhale sharply, and immediately cough, which delights him to no end. Through your watery eyes you manage to catch a whiff of salt ash, and something sharp, almost metallic. He gestures that you should dip your finger in and try it. You glance around and everyone seems to be watching, so you oblige. It's gritty, really gritty, and a little salty, with a bitter aftertaste. You smack your lips and nod, pretending it's great, which earns you a slap on the back. He's clearly pleased with himself. Historians still argue whether these market blends were purely for dental hygiene, or if some doubled as remedies for other ailments. Some recipes even included powdered incense or rare stones, possibly because they smelled nice, or possibly because someone convinced the public they worked miraculously. You watch a woman buys a pinch of something yellowish, mixes it with water in a tiny cup, and hands it to her child to gargle. The kid grimaces, but doesn't argue. You suppose if you've grown up chewing gritty bread your whole life, a bit of salty powder isn't so bad. Another stall, you see a man using a flat stone to grind something into a fine dust. You lean in and realize he's crushing dried mint leaves mixed with natron. The smell is actually rather pleasant, like toothpaste and fresh hay had a baby. He lets you rub a pinch between your fingers. It almost sparkles in the light, thanks to the fine salt crystals. And woman carries a tiny jar with what looks like burnt charcoal powder. She catches your eye and smears some on her teeth with her thumb. The effect is a little startling at first. Her teeth look black for a moment before she rinses and spits, revealing a surprisingly clean, bright smile. You can't help but chuckle. The merchant nods approvingly, as though this were the punchline of some joke. You've only just gotten nearby. A child is pestering his mother to buy him a colorful jar of something that smells sweet and earthy. You catch a faint whiff of cinnamon and cloves as the merchant opens it, revealing a deep red paste. One fringe theory holds that cinnamon-based pastes were used only by the wealthy, as spices were so precious. But the boy seems determined to have some either way. The merchant leans toward you, holding up another jar, this one filled with something pearly white. He dips a reed stick and twirls it, and hands it to you with a flourish. You take it gingerly, and after a nervous glance around, stick it in your mouth. The taste is sharper this time, almost like chalk with a hint of mint. The gritty texture reminds you of the riverbank sand, but at least this one feels intentional. You notice a potter's wheel spinning lazily at a nearby stall, the man shaping more little jars to hold these powders. He seems content, whistling softly, while his hands work the clay. Every so often he wipes them on his robe, leaving ghostly white handprints behind. You linger a moment longer at the spice merchant's stand, watching the interplay of colors and smells. It's a strangely beautiful ritual. Buyers scooping, sniffing, grinding, bartering, all to prepare their morning mouthfuls. The sun has climbed higher, and the square is alive with chatter. Somewhere nearby a musician plucks at a harp while children chase each other round the stalls. The air feels warmer now, and the scents seem even stronger, filling your lungs with a sleepy mix of earth salt and faint sweetness. You catch yourself smiling as you move on, realizing you're starting to fit in just a little, at least enough that no one stares at you anymore. Well, except the goat from earlier, who somehow seems to have followed you here, chewing contentedly on somebody's laundry. You follow the scent of clay and charcoal to a quieter corner of the village, where a potter's workshop hums with soft rhythmic sounds here under a shaded awning. Two men kneel at spinning wheels while a third tends a small kiln, its faint orange glow spilling out through cracked brick stacks of little jars, some glazed, some just sun-dried clay line the walls in neat rows. You watch for a moment as the potter closest to you shapes a jar, his hands deft and sure. The wheel spins and the wet clay rises in his palms like magic, round, smooth, perfect. He dips his fingers in a little bowl of water, smoothing the lip of the jar before placing it aside to dry every few minutes. He reaches over to a small pile of tooth powders and tests them on his own teeth, as though he's making sure the jars he's shaping are worthy of what they'll hold in another bench. A boy is mixing a batch of fresh powder. You lean closer and see the ingredients laid out before him: white salt from the Nile, Delta crushed pumice from faraway quarries, dried mint leaves, and what looks like powdered ox hoofs. He sprinkles each into a stone mortar, then begins grinding them with a pestle, the motion hypnotic. Instead, I smell here is earthy, a little sharp from the salt and faintly sweet from the mint. He looks up at you, flashes a truck dusty grin, and keeps grinding. When he finishes, he pinches a bit between his fingers and offers it to you. You hesitate, then dab some on your tongue. It's gritty, salty, and surprisingly refreshing. Not bad considering it looks like it could double as sandpaper. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly believed these powders healed cavities or just masked bad breath. There are scrolls that mention banishing the tooth demon, which sounds dramatic, but may have simply been their way of saying brush regularly and pray a little. A fringe theory you've heard suggests that some potters even added powdered turquoise or malachite to their mixes for the wealthy, believing the color brought good luck. Or maybe just because it looked pretty on the teeth. Either way, it certainly made for dazzling jarson of the men motions you over to the kiln, which crackles softly as he pulls out a tray of freshly fired jars. They're warm to the touch, smooth and solid, and each bears a faint stamp on the side, a simple glyph that resembles a tooth. You pick one up and turn it in your hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. Boy brings over a little reed basket lined with straw and carefully begins arranging jars inside. Each one is filled with powder and sealed with a twist of linen. You notice that some jars are much smaller than others, likely for travel or personal use, while a few are large enough to supply an entire household. You glance toward the far wall, where yet more jars sit, some painted with patterns, others left plain. A few even sparkle faintly, thanks to bits of crushed quartz mixed into the glaze. You can't help but think these little vessels are works of art in their own right, not just utilitarian objects. The potter grins at you, his teeth white and even in gestures, as though to say, see, this is how we keep them this way. A little girl wanders into the workshop and tugs at her father's robe. He scoops her up and gives her a tiny jar, no bigger than your thumb. She clutches it proudly and then runs off, calling to her friends. Clearly, even the smallest members of the household had their own supper. You step outside again, blinking in the bright light. The sun's higher now, and the breeze carries the smell of baking bread mixed with the faint mineral tang of the workshop. A goat, probably the same one, trots past you carrying a bit of reed in its mouth, like it's also invested in oral hygiene. As you look back, you catch the potter carefully arranging his jars on a cart, ready to deliver them to the market. His hands are still dusty, his apron streaked with clay, but his face radiates quiet, pretty. You realize then how much care and ritual go into even the smallest parts of daily life here. Every jar tells a story, every handful of powder a memory, and as you walk away, the sound of the kiln's gentle crackle and the boys' rhythmic grinding fade behind you, leaving only the faint taste of mint and salt lingering on your lips. You've barely made it a few steps back toward the square when you hear a loud, unmistakable laugh, dry, crackly, and full of mischief. Turning, you see an elderly man perched on a low stool, surrounded by a gaggle of listeners, mostly children, and A few adults who can't help but smirk at whatever story he's spinning. Curious, you edge closer. The man's skin is deeply lined, his robe patched in more places than its hole. But his eyes sparkle with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're about to say something outrageous and get away with it. In his hand is a little jar, one you recognize from the potter's workshop. Though this one is smeared with something greenish, the old man waves at you to sit. You do, partly because you're tired, but mostly because you're fascinated. He dips a finger into the jar, lifts it high, and declares loudly something that makes the kids all clap and shriek. One of them translates for you with a grin, crocodile dung, the finest whitener in all of Egypt. You blink, surely you misheard. But no, he plunges a twig into the jar, rubs the greenish paste onto his teeth, and beams proudly. The crowd murmurs approvingly, though a few of the adults exchange knowing glances. One woman mutters under her breath and shakes her head. Historians still argue whether crocodile dung was actually used in dental powders, or if it was just another of those ancient tall tales meant to scare outsiders. Archaeologists have found traces of odd ingredients in ancient jars, but crocodile dung remains contentious. The man leans toward you, eyes wide and full of mock seriousness, and presses the jar into your hand. You open it gingerly. The smell hits you like a now breeze on a particularly swampy afternoon. It's pungent, to put it politely, but not as awful as you expected, more like mud and moss than anything truly offensive. Dip a stick in, and the man's grin grows wider. The crowd hushes. You raise the stick to your mouth, hesitate just long enough for him to roll his eyes dramatically, and then press it to your teeth. Gritty, earthy, not exactly refreshing, but not unbearable either. Laughs so hard he nearly falls off his stool. The children clap and cheer. Then he waves his arms like a magician and produces a second jar, this one filled with something white and sparkling. He dabs his finger and rubs it over his teeth and makes a grand gesture to show how much brighter they appear. Now you suspect the whole crocodile dung thing is just a gimmick to sell the real powder. Clever old Foxen of the fringe theories you recall suggests that crocodile dung might have been used in medicine rather than hygiene, either as a poultice for wounds or in spells. But the way this man winks at you as he closes the jar, you're inclined to think he just enjoys watching visitors squirm. Narby, a boy with a reed basket, sits patiently waiting his turn. When the man finally hands over the jar, the boy rubs a bit of the greenish paste on his teeth, then chases it immediately with the sparkling white powder, as though that's just how it's done here. The elder then launches into another story, this one about how he once wrestled a crocodile himself to get the freshest dung possible. The kids roar with laughter. You're fairly certain he's making it up as he goes, but his delivery is flawless. You notice, though, that despite all the jokes and theatrics, everyone does eventually use the white powder, whatever crocodile dung was good for. It seems the clean finish still came from the salt and herb blend you've seen in the market. Finally, the elder leans back, exhausted from his own laughter, and shoos you away with a mock-serious scowl. The children scatter like sand in the wind, some still giggling, others practicing their own crocodile story. As you rise, brushing dust from your robe, and glance down at the little smear of green still clinging to your fingers. You wipe it off on a reed and can't help but laugh at yourself. Sun is higher now, beating down on your shoulders. The breeze carries away the last of the elder's laughter, and you feel a strange sort of affection for him. Here in the middle of the bustling village, a man has built a tiny empire of stories and jars, blending fact and fiction into something delightfully unforgettable. Tuck the memory away as you move on, already wondering what other odd secrets the day will offer, though hopefully less fragrant. You wander away from the square and follow a quiet path flanked by stone walls and towering columns. At first it seems deserted, but as you turn the corner, a pair of priests appear, robed in crisp linen, faces calm and hands busy grinding something against a slab of stone. You've stumbled into a temple. Its facade looms above you, cool and imposing, casting a long shadow even as the sun rises high. Incense curls up into the air, mingling with faint echoes of chanting from deeper inside it. 2 priests glance at you, but say nothing, apparently too focused on their task. One is grinding a pale powder that sparkles faintly while the other works on a darker mixture. Between them sit small piles of what look like stones, herbs, and dried resin. You linger at the entrance, drawn in by the scent, sharp and clean yet somehow soothing. The floor is cool under your feet, a welcome relief from the heat out. Sidion priest finally gestures for you to come closer. You do, and he picks up a pinch of his pale powder and lets it fall back to the slab like sand through fingers. You recognize the smell now, natron, that salty mineral used for embalming, and apparently also for toothpaste. Historians still argue whether temple-made powders were purely ritualistic or whether the priests sold them to the public. Some believe the sacred blends were meant only for royalty or for use in ceremonies. Others think they simply made the best powders, and people came here to stock up. Either way, it's clear these men take their craft seriously. Darker mixture intrigues you. It smells vaguely smoky, with a hint of resin. The priest notices your interest and smiles faintly. He dips a reed into it and scrubs his own teeth slowly, almost reverently, then wipes his mouth with a scrap of linen. Known fringe theory even suggests these darker blends were used at night, perhaps because their scent was more calming, or perhaps to keep away evil spirits. Hard to say, but standing here you feel the weight of centuries of ritual in every breath. Behind the priests, a low doorway opens into a darker chamber. You take a few hesitant steps and find yourself in a room lined with shelves of jars, all neatly labeled in hieroglyphs. Some are sealed with wax, others tied with reed string. The air in here is cooler still, filled with the faint metallic scent of crushed minerals and faintly floral herbs. You run your fingers along the shelf and feel the rough texture of the jars, the faint dust that clings to them. One shelf even holds a few carved ivory toothpicks, delicate and clearly precious. On a small table in the corner, a half-finished scroll lies open, covered in intricate diagrams of teeth and herbs. Someone has sketched a little crocodile in the margin, its mouth full of what looks suspiciously like toothbrushes. You suppress a laugh and move on. Outside the chamber you hear a faint rustling and look back to see another priest entering, carrying a basket of fresh herbs and a few lumps of salt. He nods to you as he pauses, already turning his attention to the work at hand. You watch as the herbs are stripped, crushed, and mixed with the powders, mint, sage, myrrh, until the air is heady with their combined scent. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, and you find yourself leaning closer and closer until one of the priests gently but firmly shoos you back toward the doorway. You step out into the sunlight, again blinking at the sudden brightness. The temple's cool, sacred air clings to you for a moment before the heat steals it away. Behind you the priests return to their grinding, their movements steady and deliberate like waves lapping against the shore. You walk on, carrying with you the quiet certainty that what happens inside those walls is more than just hygiene, it's devotion. And as you glance back one last time, you swear you catch a glimpse of that little crocodile sketched on the scroll, grinning at you from the shadows. You make your way back toward the heart of the village just as the air fills with the aroma of roasting fowl and freshly baked bread. The lanes grow livelier, servants bustling with trays, children scurrying with baskets of figs, and the sound of a harp drifting lazily over the chatter. You follow the music and find yourself at the edge of a courtyard where preparations for a grand banquet are underway. Here, under a canopy of woven reeds, women in shimmering linen dresses are arranging platters of dates and honey. Others kneel nearby, busy with bowls and jars, polishing, sniffing, and dabbing at their mouths like they're getting ready for the performance of a lifetime. Young woman catches your eye and smirks as she vigorously chews the end of a slender stick. You realize she's not chewing it like gum, she's fraying it deliberately, then turning it to scrub her teeth. Every so often she spits discreetly into a bowl, then checks her smile in a polished copper mirror. Nearby a servant sprinkles what looks like powdered mint onto a fresh reed mat. Another mixes something in a little cup and swishes it around her mouth before swallowing it with a satisfied sigh. You sit on a low bench and watch the ritual unfold, graceful and surprisingly coordinated, as if they've done this every day of their lives. Historians still argue whether this kind of pre-banquet primping was purely for vanity, or if it carried some deeper ritual significance. But here and now it seems obvious everyone wants to look and smell as fresh as possible before sitting down to eat in close quarters. With Nobleson fringe theory even claims that some women added powdered pearls to their tooth mixtures before events like this, not necessarily to clean but to shimmer slightly when they smiled looking at the jars arrayed before you. With their faintly glittering contents, it seems entirely plausibly pair of young women giggle as they pass a jar back and forth, dipping their fingers in and teasing each other about who has the brightest smile. One of them catches you watching, blows you a mock kiss, then returns to scrubbing her molars in the corner. An older servant patiently demonstrates the proper way to brush from the gum line down. She insists, wagging her finger at a group of younger girls who keep scrubbing too hard and spitting powder onto each. A platter of dates passes in front of you, and you help yourself to one sweet, sticky, and irresistible, but you immediately understand why everyone here is so invested in cleaning their teeth. The syrupy fruit clings to everything, and even you reach instinctively for one of the little frayed sticks left on a tray nearby. A boy carrying a tray of pomegranates suddenly slips, scattering seeds all over the floor. The crowd gasps and then bursts into laughter. As the boy grins sheepishly, already reaching for a broom, someone teases him, pointing at his teeth, and mimicking brushing motions. He blushes, scoops up a handful of seeds and pops them in his mouth before hurrying off. You glance round at all the little jars of powders, pastes, and sticks arrayed like jewels on the banquet table, each one a tiny piece of the night's preparations. The copper mirrors catch slivers of sunlight, throwing little glints of light across the courtyard. A harpist plucks a gentle melody as servants finish their routines and begin carrying food out to a long table draped in linen. As they line up and bow to their guests, their smiles are dazzling, bright and confident, thanks no doubt to all the scrubbing. And Minton young man leans close to you as he pauses, winking conspiratorially and muttering something that makes the girl beside him swat his arm. Judging by her laugh, it was probably a cheeky comment about your still less than perfect smell. You settle back into the bench, watching as everyone takes their place at the banquet. The air is alive with laughter, music, and the clatter of dishes, and as the first platters of roast goose are carried out, you can't help but notice, even here in the middle of feasting and revelry, a few guests still pause to discreetly dab their teeth with a powder-coated fingertip before flashing a smile at their neighbors. It's a quiet kind of pride, you realize, a ritual that speaks volumes even without words, and you find yourself reaching for another date, fully prepared to chew on it, knowing that somewhere in this courtyard, someone will be ready to hand you another frayed stick when you're done. As the banquet winds down and the sun dips lower behind the palm trees, you find yourself wandering through a quieter quarter at the edge of the courtyard. The sounds of laughter and harp music fade, replaced by a faint scraping noise and the unmistakable scent of cedar and myrrh. You follow the sound and discover a narrow doorway draped with heavy linen. Pushing it aside, you step into a small, cool room where the royal dentist works. Their inside smells sharper than the temple did, more medicinal, almost spicy. Shelves line the walls, crammed with jars and tiny bronze tools that gleam dully in the candlelight. Dentist himself, tall, stooped, and wearing an immaculate white robe, looks up as you enter. His eyes narrow, but then soften when he sees the frayed twig still in your hand. He gestures for you to come closer. You do, noting the strange assortment of objects on his worktable, delicate bronze picks and probes, fine-toothed combs, tiny scrapers, and several small hammers. There are also jars filled with powders you recognize, mint, pumice, salt, but here they're mixed with more exotic-looking substances, some of them almost glowing in the dim light. Picks up one jar filled with a dark red paste and dips a small spoon-like tool into it. He motions for you to open your mouth. You hesitate, but his faintly amused smile is enough to convince you. The paste tastes bitter, metallic, and oddly comforting, leaving behind a cool, tingling sensation. Historians still argue whether royal dentists actually performed dental surgery or if they simply treated pain with salves. and charms. Some evidence suggests they occasionally filled cavities with resin, or packed broken teeth with linen soaked in medicinal paste. Here in the hush of this room, both seem equally likely. One fringe theory claims that they even used opium-laced powders for royal patients in pain. As you sit here feeling a little lightheaded from the aromatic salves, you wouldn't be surprised that the dentist moves with quiet efficiency, inspecting his tools as though each one holds a secret. You notice an array of tiny bronze drills that glint menacingly. One has a piece of string attached to a wooden bow designed to spin the drill with surprising speed. You imagine someone lying here while that little contraption whirs away, and can't help but shudder. In a shelf behind him you spot several polished ivory toothpicks, alongside what appears to be a gold cap resting on a scrap of linen. The dentist notices you staring at it and chuckles softly, then lifts it delicately to show you its remarkably thin design to slip over a broken tooth and restore its shine. Likely a luxury only pharaohs could afford. In the corner of the room, a small wooden box is open, revealing yet more jars, some labeled with symbols you recognize from the temple. You wonder whether these are the same powders you saw earlier, perhaps blessed by priests. Before finding their way, the dentist places a jar of sparkling white powder in your hands. You peer inside, catching the scent of crushed mint and a faint note of something floral. He gestures for you to take a pinch and rub it on your gums. You do, and for a fleeting moment your whole mouth feels cleaner than it has all day. He gives a satisfied nod and goes back to his work, already cleaning a bronze pick for his next patient. You stand nodding your thanks and take one last look around the room. The candlelight dances off the gold cap, the polished tools, and the tiny jars. It's all so quiet here, so precise, so purposeful, that you almost feel like you're intruding. Stepping outside again, you're met by the warm evening air and the scent of roasting meat still lingering from the banquet. The sky glows a soft pink, and a few stars are beginning to peek through. You glance back once at the doorway, catching the faint sound of bronze scraping against stony, and as you walk away you can't help but wonder whether Pharaoh himself is somewhere beyond those walls, waiting for his turn to sit in that little room while the royal dentist works his quiet magic. The fading daylight draws you toward the edge of the village, where the earth slopes gently upward. You follow a path flanked by broken statues and weather-worn columns, until you come to an entrance carved straight into the hillside. A faint cool draft greets you as you step closer. It's a tomb, not grand like a pharaoh's, but still carefully built, and adorned. Torches flicker along the walls, their light glinting off faded hieroglyphs and half-buried offerings. A young boy crouches near the door, polishing a stone jar with a reed cloth. He glances up, nods politely, then goes back to his work. You duck inside, letting the cool air wash over you. The scent here is dry and dusty, with a faint trace of incense lingering from some long ago. Ritual shelves carved into the walls hold jars and bundles, food, linen, and what catches your eye most of all, toothbrushes. These actual toothbrushes, or at least the ancient equivalent, sticks with frayed ends neatly tied with reeds lying alongside. Tiny jars of powder sealed with wax, some are even wrapped in scraps of linen like precious treasures. You run your fingers over one of the sticks. Its wood is dry but still faintly fragrant, and the end is worn down as though it's seen years of faithful service. You set it back down carefully, realizing that even in death, these people wanted to keep their smiles intact. The historians still argue whether these dental tools were meant for practical use in the afterlife or simply symbolic of cleanliness and status. Here, surrounded by silent stone walls and rows of jars, you could believe either. In one niche you find a painted panel depicting a figure brushing their teeth, while sitting on a reed mat. Below it, a smaller figure, perhaps a servant, holds a jar open as the larger figure dips their stick inside. Even in art, it seems this humble ritual was worth recordings. You notice one jar has broken, spilling its contents into a little pile on the stone floor. The powder still sparkles faintly in the torchlight, ground pumice and salt, most likely with a whisper of something herbal. A fringe theory suggests that the presence of dental powders and tools in tombs reflected not just hygiene, but a desire to ward off evil spirits because who wants to haunt eternity with bad breath? You kneel to inspect another shelf, where bundles of linen conceal what seem to be tiny ivory picks, and combs, their fine teeth still sharp despite centuries. Underground, as you move deeper into the tomb, the air grows cooler, quieter. You can hear your own breath echoing softly off the walls. At the far end, a figure carved in relief seems to smile faintly down at you, its teeth perfectly. Even its eyes calm. You imagine what it must have been like to prepare this space, carefully laying out powder sticks and jars alongside bread, beer, and amulets. All so that whoever lay here would wake in the next world ready to greet it. With a gleaming Smilione last glance at the frayed sticks lined up so neatly fills you with a strange kind of respect even among the trappings of death. These people chose to honor something as simple and human as clean teeth. As you emerge back into the night air, the stars seem brighter now, the breeze is cooler, and though the laughter of the village still drifts faintly from below here on the hillside, it's quiet enough that you can almost hear the faint scratch of a twig on stone, echoing from the past. Leaving the tomb behind you, descend back toward the warmth of the village, guided now by the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the night air. Your feet crunch softly on the sandy path, and before long you find yourself standing at the entrance to the bakery, a wide open-air structure, buzzing with activity. Inside, the bakers work quickly, pulling flat loaves from the roaring ovens and dusting them with flour. The heat is intense, radiating out in waves, and the air is thick with smoke, yeast, and surprisingly grit. You sit on a low bench near the ovens, watching as a young boy cracks open a loaf and offers you half. You accept, biting into it without hesitation. The flavor is nutty and hearty, but then your teeth meet that familiar crunch of sand and grit. You pause mid-chew, and the boy just grins at you knowingly. The bread is coarse, packed with bran, and ground with stone tools that leave tiny flecks of quartz and grit embedded in the dough. No wonder everyone here seems so concerned about their teeth. This bread is practically designed to wear them down. One of the bakers sets down a tray of steaming loaves and sits beside you. He gestures toward a jar of powder on the shelf and mimics brushing his teeth with a stick. You laugh softly and nod, finally understanding the daily obsession with dental care. Historians still argue whether Egyptians deliberately added sand to their bread to stretch the flour, or if it was just an unavoidable byproduct of their grinding techniques. Either way, the result was the same: bread that doubled as an abrasive snack, and a dentist's worst nightmare. A fringe theory you once heard suggests that some people even soak their bread in beer to soften it before eating, a trick that seems tempting now as you try to dislodge a stubborn grain from between your molars. You watch as the bakers sprinkle seeds and herbs on the loaves, occasionally flicking away bits of ash. The ovens glow bright and fierce, and the rhythm of the work is almost hypnotic. Dough, fire, bread, grit, and repeat. Nearby, a little girl sits with her mother, carefully picking crumbs off a loaf and tucking them into her mouth. Every few bites she stops to gnaw at a frayed twig before going back for more. Even here among the flour and smoke, the ritual persists, and baker hands you a small loaf dusted with sesame seeds and winks. You bite into it, carefully savoring the warmth, even as another little crunch reminds you what's waiting for your enamel. Around you, the bakers chat and laugh, their hands and robes dusted white. Every so often, someone pauses to spit discreetly into the sand and takes another bite without missing a beat. You lean back against the wall, feeling the heat of the oven seep into your skin. The smell of baking bread mingles with the faint familiar scent of mint and salt still clinging to your finger sand. As you watch the loaves pile higher on the shelves, you can't help but marvel at how something so simple, bread, could shape an entire culture's approach to dental care. The boy beside you nudges your arm, grins, and offers you another piece of bread. You take it, shake your head in mock exasperation, and bite down anyway. After all, you think, what's a little grit when you've got a village full of sticks and powders waiting to set you right again? You leave the warmth of the bakery behind, stepping into the cooler night air, just as the faint clinking of bells and the aroma of something spicy drifts toward you. Following the sound, you soon find yourself at the edge of a caravan resting in the moonlight, a tangle of camels' baskets, and weary travelers gathered around small fires. The air is thick with the scent of resin and spice, warm and heady. You wander closer and catch sight of burlap sacks spilling over with fragrant myrrh, frankincense, and cinnamon sticks the size of your fingers. A trader seated on a worn rug waves you over. His robe is patched but elegant, and his fingers glint with traces of crushed resin dust. Without a word, he breaks off a small piece of myrrh and offers it to you. You sniff it, sweet, smoky, almost peppery, and pop it into your mouth. It's chewy, bitter at first, but then it melts into a warmth that fills your mouth and freshens your breath. The man grins, revealing perfectly white teeth, and taps his jar. If powders knowingly round you, other traders are doing the same, gnawing on fragrant resins and spitting quietly into the sand before getting back to their story. Historians still argue whether chewing myrrh and frankincense was primarily medicinal, religious, or just another way to keep the breath pleasant in a place where people lived so close together. You suppose it didn't hurt to cover up the scent of garlic, beer, and gritty bread. On fringe theory even suggests that cinnamon-based pastes and myrrh gums were reserved for the elite, given how precious these resins were here. Though everyone seems to have a little nibble tucked into their cheek. You watch as a trader grinds frankincense into a fine powder and mixes it into a jar of salt. He shows you how to smear it onto a stick, then gestures for you to try. You oblige and find the taste brighter this time, like the dessert air itself, clean and sharp. A camel bellows nearby, startling you just enough to drop your stick, which earns a chorus of chuckles from the group. The trader hands you another, slaps you on the back, and goes back to packing his sacks as the fire crackles and sparks rise into the darkness. You sit with the traders a while longer, breathing in the mingling scents of spices and smoke. The stars overhead are brilliant now, scattered like salt across black velvet. Tone of the younger traders plucks a stringed instrument and hums a tune, while the others trade stories in low voices. Every now and then someone spits quietly into the sand or pinches a bit more resin to chew. It's rhythmic, like the temple grinding or the scribes punctuating their scrolls. You realize these fragrant gums and powders are more than just tools. They're a comfort, a habit, a way of being part of something larger. The caravan prepares to move on. The trader gives you a small lump of myrrh and a knowing nod. You tuck it into your pouch, savoring its warmth and the quiet camaraderie of this place. You stand brushing off your robe and step away just as the caravan begins to file out under the stars. Bells jingle, camels groan, and the dessert swallows them up one by one, until only the scent of spices lingers in the air. You glance back toward the village, feeling the faint sweetness of myrrh still clinging to your tongue, and the soft crunch of grit beneath your sandals. And as you walk back, you think maybe fresh breath was just another kind of offering to the gods, to each other, to the night. You wander back down to the riverbank, now drawn by the gentle splash of water and the faint scent of mud. The moonlight paints the surface of the Nile in shimmering silver, and the cool breeze carries with it a freshness you didn't realize you missed. On a flat stone by the water sits a fisherman, his net draped loosely over his lap, his feet dangling just above the surface. He notices you approaching and gives a lazy wave before returning to his task, scooping up handfuls of mud, letting it fall back into the river and occasionally rubbing it between his palms, as though testing its quality. You sit beside him, quietly watching. After a moment, he hands you a small clay jar filled with what looks like dark sand. You open it and sniff. Earthy, salty, with a faint tang that tickles your nose. He gestures toward his teeth and grins, revealing a mouthful of surprisingly even, bright teeth. Then he points to the mud, dips two fingers in, and scrubs them lightly over his molars before rinsing with river water. You follow suit, scooping a bit from the jar and rubbing it gently over your own teeth. It's gritty, salty, and oddly invigorating. Haitian stores still argue whether now mud was deliberately harvested for dental care or simply an improvisation born of necessity. Either way, sitting here now, you can see why it might have become a quiet habit, free, abundant, and effective in its own rough way. A fringe theory. You've heard whispers of claims that certain layers of Nile mud contained minerals that actively strengthened enamel. Whether or not that's true, the fisherman seems satisfied. So you suppose that's evidence enough. Pulls up a small basket from the water filled with tiny fish and sets it aside before opening another jar. This one packed with coarse salt. With practiced ease, he sprinkles a pinch on his wet fingers and scrubs his teeth again, finishing with a swish of river water. You watch the moonlight glint off the ripples as he works, the silence between you companionable and easy. In the distance, a crocodile's snout breaks the surface before slipping back under, leaving only a faint ripple. The fisherman notices your gaze, chuckles softly, and mutters something about how even the crocodiles here understand the value of clean teeth. Behind you, the reeds rustle as another figure emerges carrying a basket of fresh herbs. The fisherman waves him over, and the two exchange a few quiet words before laughing and settling into their work. You sit back, feeling the cool stone beneath you and the soft pull of sleep beginning to creep into your limbs. The mud between your fingers dries and flakes off easily, leaving only a faint residue that smells faintly of salt and clay. As you stand to leave, the fisherman hands you a small pouch of the mud-salt mixture. With a toothy grin and a nod of approval, you tuck it into your belt and glance back one last time at the river, still shimmering, still whispering, still offering its quiet gifts to those who know where to look. The fisherman returns to his net, humming a tune you don't recognize, and the crocodile resurfaces briefly before disappearing again into the black water. And as you walk back toward the village, the taste of salt still on your lips, you think, sometimes the simplest things, mud, salt water, carry more magic than all the gold in the tombs. The village has quieted by the time you return. Most of the fires have burned down to embers, and the air feels softer, cooler, now tinged with the faint scent of flowers and mint. You follow the sound of gentle laughter to a moonlit courtyard where a group of women sit in a circle, their robes shimmering faintly under the stars. They don't seem surprised to see you. One of them pats the ground beside her, and you ease down into the circle. The stone beneath you is cool, and someone hands you a small cup of something sweet and fragrant. Toward the circle, the women are brushing their teeth with sprigs of mint and frayed sticks, taking turns dipping into little jars of powder and paste. Their movements are languid and graceful, almost like a dance. Every so often, someone pauses to adjust her hair or whisper a joke that ripples through the group like a soft breeze. You can smell the mint clearly, now bright and sharp with undertones of something floral. One woman leans over and offers you a sprig already bruised and fragrant. You accept, biting gently into the stem before rubbing it along your teeth. As she does, it tastes fresh and alive, a far cry from the salty grit of earlier. Historians still argue whether mint was cultivated here specifically for dental care or simply for its pleasing aroma. But either way, it's obvious these women treasure Eton. Fringe theory claims that crushed rose petals were sometimes added to powders before important occasions, both for color and to leave a faintly sweet scent on the breath. The woman nearest you seems to confirm this, sprinkling a pinch of something pink into her jar before dipping her stick in with a flourish. You sit in the circle. You notice how easily the conversation flows, low, melodic, interspersed with bursts of laughter and the occasional clink of a jar lid. Someone begins braiding another's hair while humming softly, and for a moment, you forget all about the sand still clinging to your feet and the river. Mud in your pouch. One of the younger women produces a small mirror and passes it around. Each of them takes a quick glance at their reflection, adjusting their smiles, smoothing their robes, touching up with a dab more powder. When the mirror reaches you hesitate, but look anyway. Your reflection stares back, faintly smudged with ash and salt. But your teeth do seem a little brighter than this morning. You catch yourself smiling. A few of the women exchange knowing looks and giggle behind their hands. As you hand the mirror back, you shrug good-naturedly, and someone pats your shoulder. The moon is high now, casting silver light over the courtyard. The shadows dance across the walls, and the scent of mint and crushed flowers hangs in the air. Like a quiet promise, a young woman rises and begins to collect the jars Stacking them neatly into a basket, another leans over and whispers something to you. Before plucking the mint sprig from your fingers and replacing it with a fresh one, you stand, thanking them softly, and take a step back from the circle. They smile up at you, already returning to their quiet chatter, their sticks moving like reeds in the wind. You walk away slowly, the sound of their laughter and the faint smell of mint following you into the stillness of the village. And as you glance back one last time, you catch sight of them, under the stars, brushing, laughing, and shining like pearls in the moonlight. At last you find yourself outside the village, the desert stretching out before you like a vast quiet sea. The stars are sharp and endless, and the air has cooled enough to raise tiny bumps on your skin. You sink onto a soft patch of sand at the base of a dune, feeling it shift beneath you, warm in some spots, cool in others. Here the silence is deep and soothing, broken only by the faint rustle of reeds from somewhere behind you, and the occasional distant howl of a jackal. The moon casts everything in pale light, the palm trees, the broken stones, even your own hands look ghostly. You let yourself fall back against the sand, staring up. Bits of grit stick to your cheek, but you hardly notice anymore. After today you feel as though you've made peace with the sand, the grit, even the salt lingering on your lips. They belong here just as much as the Nile and the stars. Do you close your eyes and can almost hear the river lapping faintly against its banks? The memory of the day floats through your mind in soft fragments, the frayed twigs, the old man's laugh, the cool of the temple, the warmth of the bakery, the quiet pride of the potter, every little jar of powder, every whispered story, every faint scent of mint and myrrh still clings to you like a second skin. Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly necessary or simply symbolic, but lying here under the desert sky, you can feel how much they mattered, not just for health, but for dignity, for beauty, for belonging. Goni fringe theory even suggests that Egyptians brushed their teeth at night, so their last breath of the day would smell sweet enough to please the gods. That thought lingers with you now as the stars blur above you. Sand shifts slightly beneath you as you yawn. The faint hum of crickets rises in the distance, mingling with the memory of reed flutes and temple chants. The desert is alive but soft and unhurried, and you feel your body sinking deeper into its warmth. You reach into your pouch and pull out the little sprig of mint one of the women gave you. You twirl it lazily between your fingers, inhaling its faint scent one last time before tucking it back away. Around you the breeze cools and the silence grows thicker, and finally, as your eyes grow heavier, you let yourself smile just slightly, knowing that even here, even now, your teeth are clean and bright beneath the desert stars.